Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking about episode 12 of season 3 of The Walking Dead called Clear. And I gotta say, folks, for a show that really kind of wants to surprise you as much as Walking Dead does, they really seem apparently to go out of their way to spoil stuff sometimes. I mean, the big thing this time around is we see Morgan Jones again, from right at the very beginning of the series. And from what I've seen online, apparently they spoiled this on the Talking Dead podcast. And even if you didn't listen to that, which I don't, I'm not really a podcast kind of person. I kind of passed that phase of my life where I was into those sort of things, really interestingly, to any real degree. You can totally figure out what's coming down the road just from the preview. Now, if you've been watching the series from the beginning, it's pretty obvious. You're probably going to remember Morgan, and even if you don't, Rick explains who he is. And that covers you if you've not seen, if you're kind of a newer viewer. So just showing us that preview pretty much killed the surprise of who the guy in the mask was, which is just a real total waste compared to some of the other big surprises the show has dropped on us, like Dale getting killed. But these days, the trailers and the previews pretty much spoil everything, don't they? Okay, so anyway, let's kind of just start moving along right into this episode. And we start off on what I think is kind of a cool note, where we see Stone Mountain mentioned. And if you've played the Walking Dead video game, you know that things are not likely to be any better in Stone Mountain. Now, granted, the Walking Dead video game is set in the comic universe rather than the television series universe, but still, I'm going to take that as a little bit of a nod to the Walking Dead video game, which is, incidentally, if I've mentioned here on these reviews before, is really, really good in terms of just a good Walking Dead story. Yeah, the game has it in spades. Anyway, let's just sort of keep going on. Now, the main thing that's going on here in this episode is Rick's slowly starting to come back down to earth. I mean, let's face it, out of the 4 characters in the show, Rick is only the 3rd most crazy person in the room at this point, which for him is actually some pretty serious progress. But what I like about this is it's never explicitly stated, but it's very easy for us viewers to realize that Morgan is meant to represent a potential path for Rick. The governor is Rick's sort of dark reflection. He's evil Rick, for lack of a better term. He's like Sabretooth to Rick's Wolverine. I wouldn't exactly say Lex Luthor to his Superman because, Rick's not exactly squeaky clean enough to be Superman. But the Wolverine Sabretooth thing, I think that's a fair comparison. And in case you're one of my viewers who doesn't watch a lot of my other reviews, I like comic books and superheroes. But anyway, the governor is basically kind of evil Rick. Here is in Morgan we see Rick if he had been consumed by madness. Rick really just further down the road than where he was heading before. Now, granted, as I said, Rick's starting to pull back a little bit. He's reasonably on level here, on level ground, but still, this is where Rick probably would have gone if Lori and Carl had gotten killed along the way, or if he'd gotten back to his home and found out that Lori and Carl were dead. This is what would have almost certainly have happened to Rick. And the great thing is, Rick even seems to realize this. It's the whole, but for the grace of God, there go I kind of thing. Which is probably why he starts talking about, this is a sign. And the way he's trying to pull Morgan back into sanity. You can tell it's, in a way, he's trying to give advice to his own twisted, warped version of himself. It's really great. And, of course, we have some just really fantastic acting going on in this episode. I can't praise what's going on here acting-wise between Rick and Morgan enough. It's just wonderfully, wonderfully executed. But, they're continuing on with what I said about, Rick is Morgan says, the good people like you, the bad people, like me, the bad people, the weak are dead, are gonna die or are dead, and it's the weak people like me that have inherited the earth. And you notice that Rick really doesn't take too well to being called a good person, because, well, Rick's had to make some hard choices, and you have to realize that, or you have to admit that Rick's probably had to admit to himself that he's not the man that he was, that he is no longer quite the good person he was. I mean, that's sort of the whole point of the guy with the orange backpack. We see Rick just casually ignoring a person who is literally begging for help. Now, granted, Rick has reason to be wary, but, the odds would seem to be in his favor if he decides to just so much as stop and talk to the guy. I mean, if he just says, no, we can't help you, that's at least acknowledging a fellow human being. Now, granted, in post-apocalyptic zombie land, even that's a risk, but still, how much of your humanity are you willing to shed to survive in a world like that? That is continually one of the great questions of the Walking Dead universe. And when that comes full circle at the end, and we see that the hitchhiker did get killed, and without no part to all the shouting he did to try and get Rick's attention, Rick just only sort of stops for a moment to grab his backpack for the additional supplies. It's a very telling moment, and I like how it's all very subtle. Nothing has to be blatantly beaten into our heads. It's all very clear, it's all very simple, and we as intelligent viewers can easily draw our conclusions to the ideas and themes that the writers are trying to put forth here. I mean, this is how good writing works. Speaking of nothing, okay, we are going to have to make a quick little U-turn and go back and talk about what was going on in the town. So one more thing that I wanted to say about Morgan is there's that moment where he says to Rick, please kill me, over and over again. He literally is begging Rick to kill him. One, great acting, really telling of what's going on with Morgan in his head. But also, please kill me, a rather memorable line for the comics from that version of the prison storyline, in which Morgan did not appear. It was said by another character in very, very different circumstances. But, yeah, that was perhaps some foreshadowing. If so, this is not going to end well for pretty much anybody. So anyway, Morgan, I kind of think it is interesting how he's taken his survival as some sort of mission from God. His survival is like a penance for not killing his wife, and how this ultimately cost him his son. And of course, his mission and his penance is to keep the town clear of zombies, to clear them out. This is in a way a little bit reflective of what Rick is trying to do with the prison and the area around there. So anyway, oh yeah, before we go and talk about Michonne and Carl, there's a little bit more I want to talk about what's going on with Rick. Okay, first of all, Rick's plan is basically go to the police station, get the guns there. Okay, that's a solid plan. But when he sees that it's cleared out, he starts like, okay, well, there's a guy down the street at the bar who had a gun. We can get that. I mean, like 2 or 3 guns is better than nothing in his approach. Okay, Rick was a cop there in King County. I can't help but think, like, dude, wouldn't you have known like where some of the local gun crazies lived? Why don't you go over to their house? You'd probably have a lot better luck. That seems like the sort of thing a cop would know, especially a cop in rural Georgia. But, Hey, and speaking of which, Rick keeps talking about, well, we can't get pushed further out. Okay, so this place, King County, your hometown, where Morgan is apparently within a day trip from the prison, but you can't raise him on the radio. I mean, granted, it's not a satellite phone, but what exactly is the range on that thing? Because the way this is sort of implied doesn't seem like you're terribly far away from where you started there, Rick. But as another reviewer did point out, this show is mostly sponsored by a car company, so everybody is always going to be driving as much as possible, and all the cars are going to be in perfect working order, and apparently have recently been washed, despite having been more than a year since a zombie apocalypse engulfed the entire world. Ah, man. That's, well, it's not as bad as that Marlboro truck in Superman 2, but, yeah. Anyway, so let's move over and briefly talk about what's going on with Carl and Michonne. First of all, thank God Michonne has actually decided to start talking, because she actually seems like a character. You know, she even makes some jokes. She offers, you know, she tries to comfort Rick, you know, reassure him a little bit. You know, this is a pretty far and cry from where Michonne would not answer the most simple, basic question that was perfectly reasonable, and answering was absolutely no threat to her in any way. From what, like 3 or 4 episodes ago, maybe 5? I mean, look, Michonne's an absolutely awesome character in the comics, and of course it does take her a while to really open up to the group. But the way it had been handled before this, I can't say I was really too thrilled with that. Here, it seems like they finally found how Michonne was working. You know, she's a woman of few words, serious badass, but you know, still a decent human being underneath it all. And judging by the way that she snagged that picture, possibly a ninja. Now, speaking of the picture, I think it was really, really blatantly obvious what Carl was going to go and do. You know, he says, like, it's something I need to get for Judith. You know, I mean, seriously, a picture of his mom, something you could see coming a mile away. But it's still something that really does make sense. And as I've said it before in my reviews several times, predictable is not necessarily bad, so long as it's well executed. And, well, I don't think this was a really strong execution of that particular story. You know, I think it was at least serviceable. And we do continue to see that, yeah, Carl is... excuse me. I ate just before I started working on all of this, so... Anyway, so the Carl is continuing to grow more and more, basically more and more badass as time goes by. And he's at the point where he's not going to hesitate to, if he has to, kill a human. Which, might come up pretty darn soon. So, yeah, folks, this was a little bit of a side episode, you know, a little time to sort of look at what's going on with Rick as a character, and give Michonne as a character a little time to shine before we get back to the main thrust of things with the next episode, going by the preview. So overall, as I said, this is actually a really good episode. And most of all, I really like this episode simply because it was honestly a little bit lighter than what we've been seeing recently. You know, a light episode of The Walking Dead. You know, this isn't you know, the episode where everybody breaks out and suddenly it's a musical episode or something like that. But it's an episode where there is a little bit of humor, where there is, you know, the building of some camaraderie between characters. And then, of course, there's also, you know, killing zombies and people who have gone crazy and people being devoured by zombies. You know, lightness is a very fleeting thing on this show. But anyway, folks, that's all I have for you this time around. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And you can, of course, follow me on Twitter @HoosierJedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.